Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. Are you thinking of jumping into the OLED gaming ecosystem with a brand new 32-inch 4K 240Hz model, but you're not sure whether to get one with a QD-OLED or WOLED panel? Today's video is going to provide an in-depth comparison between the two main variants to show you exactly which panel is better in which scenarios, including some side-by-side visuals that we haven't shown in reviews before. In 2024, two new and directly competing OLED panels hit the market from Samsung Display and LG Display, offering base specifications of a 32-inch 16:9 panel format, maximum 3840x2160 resolution, and 240Hz refresh rate. The Samsung QD-OLED panel has been used in monitors such as the ASUS PG32UCDM, MSI 321URX, and Dell AW3225QF, while the LG WOLED panel has been used in the LG 32GS95UE. Many more monitors using both panels are set to be released throughout 2024 as well. So what even is QD-OLED and WOLED? Well, they are both subvariants of OLED displays, or organic light-emitting diode displays. This refers to how the display panel produces light. OLED panels directly emit light from a layer of organic diodes, millions of diodes per panel. All OLED panels, whether we're talking QD-OLED or WOLED, function in this way and provide several key benefits. As OLEDs directly emit light from each panel, every pixel is able to control its light output individually, giving us per pixel local dimming, a key feature to brilliant HDR presentations. OLEDs are also able to fully switch off individual pixels to display black, leading to deep zero-level blacks and rich shadows. If you haven't used an OLED monitor before, the most obvious comparison is to an LCD. Liquid crystal displays feature a backlight that emits light which then passes through a layer of crystals that twist to control color and brightness output. As LCD backlights are either uniform or split into zones, LCDs do not have per pixel control, so you don't get per pixel local dimming or the ability to switch off individual pixels. The crystal transition process in an LCD is also typically slower than an OLED modifying the light output of a given pixel. In short, the usual features buyers desire from an OLED are its per pixel control and its transition speed, features you get with both WOLED and QD-OLED. Where the OLED subvariants differ is in their panel composition and subpixel structure. WOLED uses an OLED layer that emits white light, which then passes through color filters to display red, green, and blue. In addition, there's a fourth subpixel with no filter passing through the white light of the OLED layer. This white OLED design with its fourth white subpixel gives WOLED its name. It means white OLED. QD-OLED operates differently. The OLED layer in a QD-OLED emits blue light, which passes through a quantum dot layer, modifying the light wavelength to red and green for the red and green subpixels. The blue subpixel passes through the blue OLED light. QD-OLEDs therefore only have 3 subpixels, and these are arranged in a triangle configuration with green on top and red and blue on the bottom. The QD in QD-OLED refers to the quantum dot layer that's key to its design. While the underlying technology is still OLED, the way WOLED and QD-OLED panels operate is significantly different, which leads to many differences in performance and other display characteristics. This is especially the case with the latest 32-inch 4K panels designed for monitor use. In terms of speed and motion performance, there is little difference between WOLED and QD-OLED response times. Across all the OLEDs I've tested so far, transition speeds are roughly the same. They're lightning fast for both WOLED and QD-OLED in the 0.3 millisecond range. So when both panel technologies are run at the same refresh rate, in this case 240Hz, the maximum you can achieve on both at 4K, the resulting motion performance is essentially identical. Unlike with LCD subvariants such as TN, VA, and IPS, you don't have to worry about speed when deciding between WOLED and QD-OLED. However, with this generation of panels, there is one key difference. LG Display have created a technology they are calling dual mode, which allows their WOLED panels to operate at a lower 1920x1080 resolution with a higher 480Hz refresh rate. Switching between modes, at least on the LG 32GS95UE, is fast and easy through a button included on the bottom edge of the display. This gives 4K WOLED monitors a clear advantage in motion clarity for competitive gaming, because the refresh rate can be double that of QD-OLED. When looking at Blurbuster's UFO test results, you can clearly see the difference in clarity between a 240Hz and 480Hz OLED. The 480Hz image is simply much clearer, and elements such as fast-moving text are easier to pass in motion. With a clearer, less blurry image in motion at 480Hz, competitive gamers have an advantage spotting enemies in fast-paced battle scenarios. Of course, to achieve 480Hz on a WOLED, you have to sacrifice resolution, and a 1080p image on this monitor doesn't look amazing in terms of text clarity or sharpness, especially compared to the native 4K mode. But it's purely an optional mode that has no impact on the 4K 240Hz mode. So in the best cases, a 4K WOLED panel can be faster in competitive scenarios if you're willing to drop the resolution, and in the worst cases, a 4K WOLED will be equal to 4K QD-OLED in clarity when both are set to 4K 240Hz. The higher refresh rate in the dual mode configuration also gives WOLED the edge in input latency. While all 4K OLEDs that I've tested have had excellent sub 1 millisecond processing delays in their SDR and HDR modes, the higher 480Hz mode has less refresh lag and lower overall latency because the refresh rate is twice that of the 240Hz mode. So when comparing WOLED and QD-OLED input lag, they're both roughly the same at 4K 240Hz, but WOLED panels are capable of even lower lag when set to the 480Hz mode. If you are firmly a single-player oriented gamer that will mostly use the 4K mode, there's little difference between the OLED technologies for motion. If you're a competitive gamer, the 480Hz mode provided with WOLED is clearer and provides lower latency, giving it a notable advantage. Brightness is always a significant talking point when it comes to OLED, as this is a known weakness compared to LCDs. There are some differences between 4K WOLED and 4K QD-OLED panel brightness, but it might not be as significant as you think. Now, panel brightness isn't always consistent across implementations, especially with WOLED. We saw last year with 1440p monitors that some manufacturers like ASUS were able to provide higher brightness than others using the same panel. QD-OLEDs tend to be more consistent in brightness capabilities across models, though brightness accuracy can vary. So what I'm about to talk about is based on testing just a handful of the 4K OLED models that will be available this year. SDR brightness is basically the same between the WOLED and QD-OLED models that I've tested so far. Both panel variants offer 250 nits in the SDR configuration, with uniform brightness modes available or enabled by default. Still not especially bright, but no advantage either way. In HDR brightness, both panel types appear capable of a similar level of peak performance. Based on testing the 32GS95UE, 2% and 10% window brightness can get slightly higher on the WOLED model, while 5% is higher on the QD-OLED models. This is based on synthetic testing using standard patterns. For brightness accuracy, this is something that will vary depending on the model that you get. So far, the QD-OLED models I've been testing have achieved a greater EOTF tracking accuracy than the WOLED model from LG, but across the last few years testing OLEDs, this is more related to how the specific product is tuned rather than the panel being offered. So it pays to look at reviews and see which specific models are the best in terms of accuracy. It's possible that other WOLED monitors coming in the next few months will offer similar accuracy for HDR EOTF. It's also possible that brightness accuracy is affecting real-world results. While test patterns show brightness trading blows between WOLED and QD-OLED, if not the WOLED being slightly brighter for the smallest peaks, in real scenes, the QD-OLED monitors I've tested have typically been brighter. For example, in our low APL video test, the MSI 321URX hits 897 nits, whereas the LG 32GS95UE, in its brightest mode, achieves just 603 nits. There's a less substantial difference in mid-APL scenes, but still an advantage to QD-OLED. However, this is something that should be assessed per model, as even some QD-OLEDs don't perform the same, as you can see with the differing results between the ASUS, MSI, and Dell models. What won't change between models is that QD-OLED has significantly higher color brightness than WOLED. The brightness results you've been seeing so far have related to white brightness, which on WOLEDs is enhanced thanks to its white subpixel. When displaying bright, highly saturated colors, the white subpixel has no effect, leading to worse results on a WOLED panel. Typically what I've seen is that color brightness on a QD-OLED is more than twice as high as on a WOLED. For the primary colors, red brightness improves from 105 to 241 nits, going from WOLED to QD-OLED. Green improves from 296 to 686 nits, and blue improves from 34 to 69 nits. You'll also see large gains for the mixed colors like cyan, yellow, and magenta. This means that when content requests a bright and highly saturated element, like a neon sign for example, the QD-OLED screen will get much brighter. This leads to a significant advantage for QD-OLED in color volume. Based on low APL testing that has both panels producing their brightest highlights, QD-OLED achieves around 73% Rec 2020 color volume compared to just 34% for WOLED. The advantage clearly goes to QD-OLED for displaying the largest amount of the HDR color and brightness range. There's a less significant difference in color space coverage though. WOLED typically sits around 72 to 73% Rec 2020 color space coverage, whereas QD-OLED is in the 80% range. So while QD-OLEDs can display a larger range of colors than WOLED, when brightness isn't factored in, both panel types do offer a wide color gamut that's suitable for HDR. Text clarity is a big talking point with 4K QD-OLED and 4K WOLED panels. Both of these new higher density panels offer better text clarity than previous iterations, and in my opinion for typical usage, the text quality of either is decent enough. You won't see text quality that's quite as good as an LCD of the same size and resolution, but for most applications like web browsing or writing documents, it's pretty good. And I've been using the 4K QD-OLED for productivity for over 6 weeks now with no real issues. With the 32-inch 4K panels, QD-OLED and WOLED do render text differently. This is due to a different subpixel structure between the two. WOLED uses RGWB in a stripe configuration, whereas QD-OLED uses triangle RGB with the green subpixel above the red and blue. Modern operating systems use subpixel text rendering techniques to improve text quality, and these techniques are designed around traditional RGB stripe subpixel layouts you see in LCD panels. Any deviation away from RGB stripe leads to weaker text quality, and both QD-OLED and WOLED offer different layouts to RGB stripe. My opinion is that at 140 ppi, the artifacts with 4K QD-OLED text rendering are difficult to spot, but there are different artifacts with QD-OLED and WOLED. QD-OLED typically sees a bit of pink-green fringing at the bottom and top of text respectively. WOLED typically sees some shadowing along the fine left or right edges of text. Based on my typical usage of these panels using 125% scaling in Windows, I find the shadowing on WOLED more noticeable than the fringing on QD-OLED, but after examining a range of different configurations, this can differ depending on everything from text size and font to text color and background. Some of these things can be hard to visually show on camera, as the closer you get to the screen with greater magnification, the more likely the footage is to show individual pixels, which is not really how you view this sort of pixel density at a normal viewing distance, but I'll try my best to explain it. Basically, the smaller the font size is, the better QD-OLED tends to look. When viewing this small font size, the edge definition around especially some of the lowercase letters like B, F, and P is better on QD-OLED. Not all letters look better, but in general, I think QD-OLED is ahead. With that said, the smaller the font, the more likely fringing will appear, though it's much more visible in this footage than in real life. With larger font sizes, it's much more of an even match. For example, QD-OLED with this font handles letters like capital E and lowercase n better, but WOLED is superior for capital T and lowercase j. The differences are also less pronounced for white text on a black background, as well as various colors of text like red or green. Generally, having used both panels side by side, I prefer the way that QD-OLED renders text in Windows. However, I don't think it's a significant issue, and buyers should largely be happy with the text quality offered by these OLEDs. It's significantly better than previous OLED panels. If you absolutely must have the best text quality, then IPS LCD will be the best choice for you. But in 2024, the density and subpixel structure of these OLEDs is good enough for typical use. The screen coating used for QD-OLED and WOLED is also substantially different. QD-OLED uses a glossy coating for the monitors released so far, whereas WOLED uses a matte coating, and LG Display's choice to go with matte for their panels has been reasonably controversial. However, in my experience, whether glossy or matte is better can be highly subjective, and it could depend on how you use your monitor. WOLEDs use a screen coating and panel composition that is more effective in brighter ambient environments. The use of various filters results in less reflection of ambient light, preserving the deep blacks of OLED in more conditions. In brighter environments, especially with lighting in front of the display, this type of matte WOLED will appear to have deeper blacks than a glossy QD-OLED. In a side-by-side comparison, you can clearly see the blacker appearance of WOLED when showing black compared to the red-grey of QD-OLED, which is reflecting more ambient light. The matte finish also helps WOLED reduce defined mirror reflections compared to QD-OLED. In bright environments, it's possible to clearly see some objects reflected in a glossy QD-OLED display, and this is especially problematic if there's bright objects like lights or windows opposite your monitor. On a WOLED, these elements will be diffused and less distracting, although any light is generally still reflected to some degree. The glossy finish on QD-OLED is also one of the better coatings for minimizing mirror reflections, even if they are still present. On the other hand, there are some setups where QD-OLED will be preferable. Optimizing light placement to avoid light sources shining on the display will greatly reduce ambient light reflectivity, and it is possible in some cases to get QD-OLED reflecting less light in general, making use of the glossy finish's ability to prevent diffusing light. This will be a case-by-case basis though, and could take some work to optimize. But generally, if you can get light sources largely behind the screen, QD-OLED will end up looking better than the matte WOLED coating, as there is no coating grain. This gives QD-OLED the appearance of greater clarity and a more crisp presentation. With no noticeable light diffusion, it also enhances the apparent contrast in some situations, providing more pop to vibrant, high-contrast scenes. The WOLED coating grain is moderate in nature and can be noticeable in some situations, though I personally don't find it annoying. In a dark environment, such as gaming with the lights off, there's really not much of a difference between QD-OLED and WOLED except for coating grain. Both panel types will produce the same rich zero-level blacks with no ambient light in the room. The matte finish does not impact blacks in this sort of environment, and neither does the QD-OLED panel's poor handling of ambient light reflections. To summarize the difference in coating though, generally you'll want a matte coating if you're mostly going to use the monitor in a brighter environment, and a glossy coating when using it mostly in a darker or light optimized environment. Both QD-OLED and WOLED variants offer similar viewing angles, excellent in both cases, with little fall off to colors or brightness when viewing at off angles. Both panel types have excellent edge-to-edge uniformity due to their high viewing angles, so at a typical viewing position there is no obvious issues viewing the corners of the screen. One thing to note though is if you are interested in a curved 4K OLED monitor, currently that is only offered with QD-OLED technology. The Dell Alienware AW3225QF uses one of Samsung Display's curved offerings, whereas LG Display are only producing flat WOLEDs with this format at the moment. While generally uniformity is quite good with both WOLED and QD-OLED, for dark grey shades WOLED can suffer from artifact issues we label the dirty screen effect. This is difficult to capture on camera, but basically when viewing large uniform sections of dark grey like you get in some applications, QD-OLED will show these sections clean with great uniformity, whereas WOLED has a bit of a dirty speckling that makes these sections less uniform. It's a minor annoyance that may affect some applications, but as large grey sections like this are uncommon in video content or gaming, it won't affect many of the typical OLED use cases. Power consumption also differs between QD-OLED and WOLED, though it depends on the content you're viewing. When content is predominantly white, WOLED is typically more efficient thanks to the use of a white subpixel, using around 35 to 40% less power than QD-OLED for pure full-screen white. However, in other scenes where the white subpixel has little to no advantage, like viewing the Steam Store homepage, the situation is reversed and now QD-OLED is more efficient. In this example, I saw 47 watts on the WOLED and 32 watts on the QD-OLED. Other aspects to performance will largely come down to individual models and units. Color calibration is one example where this will differ depending on the brand, as will features like KVM switches, color space emulation modes, port selection, and burn-in warranties. However, based on what we've seen announced so far, it seems that if you want Dolby Vision support, that will only be provided through QD-OLED variants. Overall, when choosing a new 32-inch 4K OLED monitor and deciding whether to go QD-OLED or WOLED, there's more to consider than might first appear. The two panels on the market right now are based on the same sort of underlying technology, but the implementation, performance, and features are quite different. The main similarities relate to the fundamental aspects of OLED. Response times and motion performance are the same at the same refresh rate, and both variants offer deep zero-level blacks and per-pixel local dimming, leading to excellent HDR presentations. We're also faced with similar SDR brightness, the same excellent viewing angles, and a similar risk of burn-in. We just don't have the evidence yet to say which OLED technology is more resilient. There are also going to be areas which will come down to the individual models offered by the various monitor manufacturers. Calibration in both the SDR and HDR modes, brightness accuracy, port selection, additional processing features, burn-in warranties, and so on are all controlled by the OEM and will differ between models even if they use the same panel. So as always, check reviews for those things. When it comes to the differences though, there are clear strengths to each OLED variant. The 4K WOLED panels have the edge in motion clarity with their dual mode functionality that allows it to run at 1080p 480Hz, lowering input lag and increasing clarity for competitive gamers. While there's no real difference at 4K 240Hz, the ability to run at that higher refresh will be highly attractive to those that love to play fast-paced titles. QD-OLED has the advantage in color quality. This OLED type has a wider color gamut and much higher color volume, as color brightness is significantly higher compared to WOLED. While WOLED theoretically can produce higher peak white brightness, in practice so far we've seen QD-OLEDs get brighter in most HDR situations, although this could vary between units. I also noticed better uniformity on the QD-OLED panels with no dirty screen effect, and so far QD-OLEDs are the only type to support Dolby Vision, though it seems more of a scalar limitation than WOLED panel limitation as to why the WOLEDs announced so far haven't supported Dolby Vision, as obviously there are WOLED TVs that do support Dolby Vision. There are some areas that will come down to personal preference as well. QD-OLED panels are mostly glossy, while all 32-inch 4K WOLED panels are matte. Each coating has its strengths and weaknesses, and some people have very strong preferences as to which is better. I think QD-OLED is better in darker environments and WOLED better in brighter environments. There are also differences in text clarity, where I have QD-OLED slightly ahead based on what I've tested, though both panels offer decent enough text quality for everyday productivity use. I know this can be a bit of a cop-out at times, but when it comes to 4K WOLED versus 4K QD-OLED, I don't think there's an obvious winner, and I would recommend each panel to a different sort of buyer. If you love competitive multiplayer gaming, I think 4K WOLED with its dual mode functionality is the clear choice, but for single-player HDR gaming, I think the higher brightness and superior color volume of QD-OLED is more attractive. In terms of actually choosing a monitor to buy, I suspect a lot of it will come down to the actual monitors on offer as well, not just the panel being used. I personally think the LG 32GS95UE using the WOLED panel is too expensive right now at $1,400 US. It's lacking a few of the features compared to QD-OLED alternatives, and it could do with better calibration. You'll see more about that in my review. But there are more WOLEDs coming later this year from brands such as ASUS, which may be more competitive in some of these areas. What I'm happy to see in general though is competition and plenty of great options. Having two panel variants means more options for buyers, more competition to drive prices down, and hopefully it will incentivize further development and innovation among OLED gaming panels. So anyway, that's it for this comparison between 4K QD-OLED and 4K WOLED. Hopefully a few more comparison shots, some nice useful information if you're tossing up between the two main variants that are available at the moment. If you appreciate all the testing that we do here on Monitors Unboxed, please do go watch the reviews that cover in depth some of the monitors that we've been talking about, the LG, ASUS, Dell, and MSI variants. We've got full coverage of all of those up on the channel right now, and as we get more variants coming in, we'll be testing those as well, so subscribe to the channel for more. Also, if you want to support us directly, we've got our Patreon and Floatplane accounts. Links are in the description below. Down there, you'll find access to things like our Discord community, which is a great place to sign up and talk about monitors, chat about recommendations, other sorts of things. Obviously, all of our PC hardware stuff is in there as well. BTS videos, monthly live streams, plenty of good stuff. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.